Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I'm a former high school teacher. I have to wait for that. And I'd like to also say good afternoon to those of you online. We know that you will not respond with the good afternoon that we will hear. Thank you for coming to or attending our fireside chat today hosted by the Graduate School. Today's discussion is titled, Keeping the Door Open, Preparing for Academic and Non-Academic Careers After Graduate School. My name is Stephanie Danette Preston. I serve as the Associate Dean for Graduate Educational Equity and Chief Diversity Officer for Graduate Education here at the Pennsylvania State University. I'll start with introductions from our panelists and then give the bio of our speaker, and we will begin.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katie Bodie-Lang. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach in the Office for Research Protections here at Penn State, so I am your local one today. And my degree is I have my Master's of Fine Arts in Poetry from Penn State. So, more to come.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christopher Wren. I'm an architect at 15 Architecture and Design, an associate, and I'm also an adjunct associate professor of architecture at Temple University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kyler Sherman Wilkins, he, him. I'm an associate professor of sociology at Missouri State University, and I received my master's and PhD in sociology and demography in 2017. So, good to be back.
Bless you. Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Gruber. My current position is I'm a Vice President of Research and Development at a company called Origin Materials. And I got my PhD degree in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology here at Penn State at this campus in 1998 in the lab of Don Bryant.
And I'll take care of you. Again, my name is Stephanie Danette Preston, and we are excited to have you here. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sharon Meltzer. Dr. Sharon Meltzer has an accomplished career in both government and academics. She is a criminologist with expertise in transnational organized crime, terrorism, illicit finance, and illicit trade. She's pretty awesome. You'll hear more. Currently, she teaches a graduate level course on international organized crime at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs and is a foreign affairs officer with the United States Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, INL, correct? She is also an at-large board member of the Pennsylvania State University's Graduate School Alumni Society Board of Directors. During her academic career, Dr. Meltzer taught courses on organized crime, white-collar crime, human trafficking, terrorism, transnational crime, research methods, criminological theory, and an introduction to criminology and the criminal justice system. She has also designed, directed, and implemented a study abroad program, a criminology program abroad in the Czech Republic and in Germany. Previous academic appointments include serving as a senior fellow affiliate faculty with George Mason University's Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center, and as an assistant professor of criminal justice at the State University of New York, or SUNY, in the college at Plattsburgh. Additionally, she has served several national positions in national professional organizations. To name a few, she has served as the executive director of International Association for the Study of Organized Crime and on program committees for the American Society of Criminology and the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences annual meetings. She's pretty amazing, and it continues. Dr. Meltzer's government experience spans 3 departments: State, Treasury, and Defense. In addition to her current position at State, she also served as a detail lead to its Bureau of Counterterrorism and as a senior advisor for transnational threats and illicit trade, a Franklin Fellow within INL. She was also a strategic policy specialist with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a U.S. Department of Treasury Bureau. Dr. Meltzer also held an adjunct faculty appointment with the Department of Defense's Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. I don't think I've read a bio this thick before, okay? Especially not one on these 3 areas. From Penn State, Dr. Melzer earned an MPA and a BA in Administration of Justice and a BA in History. What were you doing? She also holds an MS in Criminology from Florida State University and a PhD in Justice Law and Society from the American University. Please welcome Dr. Sharon Melzer.
Thank you so much. I obviously really liked education. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Penn State, and I just kept going. Thank you very much for reading my bio, and I hope that my words that I would like to share with you today live up to my bio. But the first thing, if anybody is interested in joining the federal government and you do public speaking, all of their lawyers will then tell you that you need to read a statement saying that the characterizations and opinions shared throughout this speech and fireside chat are mine and do not represent those of the U.S. government. And yes, I also have to say that in my courses. But no, seriously, as an undergrad, I decided to be a criminology professor. Just right across the street, I was Justice in History, and at that time, Justice was in the Oswald Tower, and I decided that I was going to be a criminology professor. And as you could probably tell, focus on organized crime. And I think I'm one of the rare people who, from the beginning of undergrad, knew what she wanted to do and just stuck with it. And I realized that also I always had a backup plan, which is why I have way too many degrees. And I realized that when you do want to pursue your goals, it is sometimes nice to have a safety net. So this whole idea of a dual track career for me is not new. But I went after that goal as being a criminology professor. I got the tenure track position. I taught only the courses I wanted to teach. I was chair of a curriculum committee. I had great students. I won some awards. I got to do my research in my backyard. I live 12 miles south of Canada, and my dissertation was on illicit tobacco cigarette smuggling, and there's a lot of cigarette smuggling over the Canadian border, and so it was perfect. I got to do some work on a human trafficking task force. As you mentioned, I was developing study abroad programs, which are near and dear to my heart. I even had the book contract for my dissertation. I was checking all of the boxes that graduate students are told that they need to check when you're a junior faculty member. But something was really missing. And I was incredibly thankful that I got to live literally around the corner from my aunt and uncle who have since passed away for cancer. So I'm incredibly thankful that I did have my job up at SUNY Plattsburgh. But something was missing, and I missed my life in Washington. I missed that work-life balance that DC, would give me. And so one day, I got a very cryptic email from a retired academic who went to join the State Department. And in typical DC fashion, it was like, can we have lunch the next time you're in town, but I can't tell you what this is about whatsoever. And of course I said yes, being a Washingtonian. So we had lunch, and she asked me to consider moving back to DC and serving as that Franklin Fellow with the U.S. Department of State, which was a unique program that has since changed, but it would bring mid to senior level experts into the State Department to help with certain projects. And I never considered working for the U.S. government. I was one of those golden children that would be the academic. My faculty would say, oh, no, you're going to be an academic. You're going to get that tenure track job. And so I just never considered working with the federal government, but this opportunity really, really interested me. And I spoke with my dean, who permitted me to serve as a fellow during my pre-tenure sabbatical. And it was yet another unexpected twist in my career path. It was scary. It was
I was afraid to jump. What about publications and tenure? Will they stop my tenure clock? Because this is not a traditional pre-tenure sabbatical. If not, how will they count my government publications and presentations? Will they count it all? Nothing in my career prepared me to be a Fed. But I also didn't plan on getting that second master's degree, returning to Penn State to work for the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, which is actually housed at Penn State. And that worked out, and that's how I get to serve on the board. So, these things work out. I also never considered illicit tobacco as a dissertation topic. When I started my doctoral program, I gave my dissertation advisor a list of interests: organized crime, white-collar crime. I have to do something quantitative, criminological theory, terrorism. I want to do something groundbreaking. I gave her a really long laundry list of topics I wanted to talk about. And she said, I'm going to have to think about this. And then a couple of weeks later, she said, illicit tobacco. And I remember what I said to her. I said, I don't smoke. Which I don't know, like 15 years later, I'm still not sure why I said that. But every day since 2005, there hasn't been a day that's gone by that I have not thought about illicit tobacco or cigarette smuggling. And I always joke that I guess I really am addicted to tobacco, even though I don't smoke. But it was the perfect topic. And not only did it check all of those boxes, but it is what brought me to the State Department. And it's also the reason why I stayed. First of all, State did give me the best title ever, Senior Advisor for Transnational Threats and Illicit Trade. I mean, that really is just the most awesome title ever. And I got to go around and interview numerous law enforcement and policy people and health policy people, and I got to form an interagency working group, and we got to do things, and we published this great guide that is still being cited by Congress, every single Congress, as well as other types of outlets as well as other outlets will cite it. But really, what is the coolest thing than having your dissertation topic turned into a national security issue? I mean, that was just the coolest thing. And that's how they get academics to join the federal government. And I also met some truly, genuinely amazing and dedicated and talented public service servants from throughout the U.S. government and our foreign partners as well. It really was a life-changing experience. And those unexpected twists and turns can be scary, and they can lead to opportunities that really say, hey, maybe I might want to take a different path in my career. And I'm thankful that not only did I have that opportunity to serve as a Franklin Fellow, but I also had a really good support system in place to be able to serve and my own abilities to be able to say yes. And when my fellowship ended, I decided to take some time. Because I renewed my fellowship, I needed to resign my faculty appointment in New York. Yes, I walked away from a tenure track position and a book contract. I wanted time and distance to decide which path I wanted to take. My dissertation advisor appointed me as the senior fellow at her center, and she gave me the space and support I needed to make my decisions. I decided to learn how to scuba dive. You must pass a written test before they turn you loose into the ocean. We all know how to study and take written tests. You do pool work to make sure that can do this. So I did the pool work. I passed all those tests. I flew to Aruba. I got on a boat and then stood at the edge of a boat in my fins with my regulator, with my BCD and the weights and a very heavy tank, knowing that I needed to step off into the deep. And if everything worked as planned, I would bounce up quickly. If not, I would be in trouble. I didn't sink, I swam. And that is the best analogy I have with what it was like deciding to spend my pre-tenure sabbatical as a fellow and then deciding not to return to academia full-time and commit to a career in public service. I accepted the position at FinCEN to increase my anti-money laundering and threat financing skills and to gain more experience working in multinational settings. I was the lead author for numerous financial advisories, and my dissertation advisor could not be prouder. When I was detailed to State's Counterterrorism Bureau, I kept building my skill set, and I spent a lot of time drafting and editing lengthy multilateral reports. I absolutely loved it, and my colleagues loved that I loved doing this. And I kept my positions at George Mason and at George Washington. I'm an introvert, and I learned that besides spending time with my friends and family and my beloved dog, how I recharge and protect myself and increase my energy is through my academic work. Having a dual track career does have its challenges. I'm very open to hiring managers that being an academic is in my DNA and that I need that outlet to do my federal job well. My network of academic friends and colleagues allow me to find experts in random things within minutes. And that has happened more often than you would think. Like, hey, we have this weird topic. Do you know anybody? I'm like, sure, let me send an email. But I'm also not the typical Fed. And I have various deficiencies and haven't had all of the typical experiences. And it can be challenging on the academic side. I see things differently now. Perhaps I've gone native. And I'm not keeping up with the literature or the latest statistical methods as I would have if I was still a full-time academic. But I get to serve with several really great academics as well. I've been on dissertation committees. I've served on various different program committees for our academic societies. And I get to teach organized crime at GW, which I absolutely love. And a few months ago, a couple of friends talked me into giving a paper at the next American Society of Criminology conference. So next month, I will be giving an academic paper. But I do wonder, can I write in the same academic style? Can I still get things published in academic journals? And perhaps it's a case of imposter syndrome. And if so, I know that I'm in excellent company, as many people in my various circles have been afflicted by it from time to time. So having a two-track career isn't always easy, and some downsides exist. Doing things out of the ordinary worked for many trailblazers. Both academics and public servants have called me a trailblazer, and I usually get a little embarrassed when they do. But accepting that sometimes it's best to let some opportunities go is essential too. I've passed up jobs. I've passed up co-authorships. And one of the things that my first dean said to me shortly after she hired me is she said, I think with you, I'm going to have problems with you learning how to say no. And I was a little shocked when she said that to me. And years later, I completely understood what she was talking about. And being able to say no is a really important skill, especially if you really need to devote your resources elsewhere. And those resources are your time and energy. So one never knows where you will be presented with opportunities that could lead to a career change or a dual track career. It's a personal choice. And it doesn't have to be academia versus government. It could be industry. It could be working at startups or volunteering or adding different types of skill sets to your organization. But if you decide that it's not for you, then that's fine. If in 10 years from now I decide that I don't want to do both and I only want to do one or the other, that's fine too. And so shortly after I jumped off that boat in the Caribbean, I decided though that I didn't have to choose between the two. I didn't have to choose between being an academic and being a public servant. I could do both. So if you're going down a path and an unexpected twist happens that you want to follow, consider it. And it's okay to change your career along the way and follow a path that works for you. And if that path doesn't exist, then create one.
That's how you start a show. I do want to acknowledge two people in the room just so that we will know logistically how we're working here. Mrs. Leslie Jackson is handling our online questions at this point. So those questions that are that will come from our online guests will be fielded through Ms. Jackson. And then Dr. Sarah Ades has agreed to field the questions in the room, so please do not be shy, okay? We'll start with one for our panelists. And ready to go. Great. So the first question for the panelists are if you could talk about who you are and what your career path has looked like. We've heard a lot about Dr. Melzer, so we want to hear a little bit about our squad, the rest of the squad as we've been called.
In order? Okay. I'll go first then. So the MFA in poetry does not immediately, everybody might be surprised to know that does not, poets don't make a lot of money. This might come as a shock to you. Do I have any other artists in the room, though? Other graduate student art? No. One. Oh, thank you. So it's nice to know. So my background was a liberal arts background in women's studies and English from undergrad. And I did a lot of work actually in the nonprofit sector. And that was where I thought, like, United Way, foundations, had a lot of nonprofit sector work. But I really wanted to make sure that I had known from a young age that I wanted to publish a book of poetry. And so I decided it was definitely important that I wanted to get my MFA. And so came to Penn State, actually have a fantastic creative writing program. But again, all I'd ever seen in terms of what can people do is you're teaching. If you're writing, you're teaching. There's not many other options. We don't, the patron system fell apart a long time ago, which is a huge disappointment, frankly. If anybody would like to revive that, do let me know. But in the meantime, it was, so after I graduated from Penn State, and I had the opportunity to keep teaching here as a non-tenure line faculty member. And so was teaching English and enjoying that and doing well, and budget cuts, which meant that there was not going to be teaching positions for my cohort after a few years. So what I actually did is I took on some freelance grant writing, and that was actually what ended up changing things for me because I had that nonprofit background, where at the end of this project, where I'd actually been putting together a Penn State grant for multiple institutions were going together for a large center grant. And somebody at the end, the wrap-up party where we all excited, we got the grant submitted, said, so what part did you enjoy about this? And I said, well, I really liked the putting all the pieces together and managing that. And they said, so you like project management? And I don't mean to sound naive, but I'd never heard that term before. And I was like, oh, wait. Project management. And so when I started looking for jobs, because I'm in a situation where my spouse was teaching here and we needed at least one job, right? So as I began my job search, and I didn't have a book of poetry published yet. So if you're not familiar, you can't get a teaching job until you have a book of tenure line teaching job until you have a book of poetry published. And mine didn't get published until after I'd gotten my job. But I'm happy for the turn it took. And so I actually ended up working more in a project management type situation in a research center and in the College of Health and Human Development here. And I was able to kind of make that transition and convince them that if I'm able to manage teaching 4 classes of undergrads and grading that many papers and can do this and teaching and manage to do this grant project, I can probably work in an office for 40 hours a week. And so it turns out I can, and was able to do that. And so moved into learning more about, okay, there is this whole, and I think that's probably even why I'm here today, is to talk a little bit about, there's this whole group of people who support the mechanism that is Penn State University that are not academics. And that was was a world I didn't know existed when I was in graduate school, and would have been really helpful for me, frankly, though I'm grateful that I kind of fell into that. So I've continually moved. I've used that background that I have in the research, a kind of boots on the ground background. It was not my degree, and moved over into, now I'm in research compliance, which is something nobody knows exists. But there's an office of over 50 of us who are, if you're doing human subjects research or animal research, or you're doing that diving for research, we make sure you're doing it safely and correctly. And so that's what my office handles. And I manage the outreach and communications for all of that. So my book of poetry did win the American Poetry Review First Book Prize. Thank you. It was a while ago, but thank you. But I've found that I can still continue to have that life even as I make a living, because as I actually was joking with someone earlier this morning, when everybody's like, when I got that job and then my book got published, they go, "Are you going to leave us?" And I said, "I won $3,000. Total. Like, that's like one of the biggest poetry book prizes you can get." And I was like, oh, and I got invited to speak in Philadelphia. I'm making $250, right? Like, no, it's okay. So I've kept my day job. I keep writing poetry, and but I will say the only interesting thing is I probably don't brag about my MFA except in this situation. Most of the scientists are not interested in having a poet talk to them about compliance. So. The long and winding road, I apologize for going on so long.
That was great, thank you. So I realized I forgot to say that I got my BArch, my undergraduate architecture degree here at Penn State, and then I stayed for my Master of Architecture degree. And it was during that time that I was doing my Master of Architecture degree that I got to do some teaching. I was a teaching assistant and a research assistant during that time, and just loved it, loved teaching, got a lot of satisfaction out of it. But I never thought I would be a teacher. I wanted to build buildings, I wanted to make architecture. So when I graduated, I went to work for a pretty large, well-known national architecture firm, like an award-winning firm that I was really excited about. But I kept going back to school and volunteering to do reviews. I was an invited critic. I invited myself sometimes, but I was always like keeping involved with academia. And one day, the department head at Temple said, "Would you like to teach a course? Would you like to do an adjunct teaching?" And I said, I don't think I can do that. My work schedule is crazy. But I went back and I talked to the principals, and they were super enthusiastic about it, surprisingly. They thought there was lots of value in having people from our firm be out in the academic world, whether it was for like recruiting purposes, whether it was for visibility purposes, sort of getting our name out there in the local community, because we were doing most of our work nationally and not really in Philadelphia. So they were really supportive of it. And I found that it was sort of mutually enriching, that I was like learning things in teaching that I could bring back to the office, and learning things in the office that I could bring to teaching. So I've been teaching now for 10 or 12 years at Temple University, and I think that's why I'm here today, is because I'm an example of somebody who's sort of doing both. And it even occurs to me that at some point in the future, that might be something that I might even want to flip the ratio of, that maybe I'd want to teach full-time, but still keep my foot in practice a little bit as well. And there are ways to leverage my experience as a practitioner of 20 years as sort of research, as having expertise in practice, in building sciences, in the actual construction of buildings. So that's why I'm here this evening.
Okay, Kyler again. So when I entered Penn State's, so we have a PhD program. You get a master's en route to the PhD. So when I came, I pretty much knew that I wanted to be an academic. That was something that I just knew when I applied. And then grad school happened. And It's rough, y'all. It's rough. Probably preaching to the choir. And, you know, especially when you're surrounded by brilliant colleagues, brilliant professors. I suffer from imposter syndrome, still do, frankly. It never goes away. You just learn how to cope with it. And so the last year, especially given that our program was dual sociology and demography, a lot of folks went into non-academic careers, particularly the U.S. Census Bureau was a prime destination for a lot of students. So I was all in. My last year, I was all in. I'm going to go to the census. And then my mom and grandmother, who are very influential, was like, well, you know, you should apply for at least a couple of tenure track jobs. You know, that's the gold standard of academia. Just do it. You know, you could be surprised. And I said, okay, whatever. So I applied to maybe 2, and then a postdoc. And at this time, I was, you know, giving my fingerprints to the government, which is required. So I was like, again, pretty full on with the census. And then I got the call about the postdoc, which I'm like, oh, this is really cool. But it was at Research Hospital, and I'm a sociologist by training, so I wasn't really interested in going and doing medical research. Then I got the tenure track job. And what was cool about this particular job, and I took the job, that's why I'm an associate professor now, recently promoted. But what was real, thank you. That was also rough, but made it. What was cool about that particular job is like we're always talking about like how do we decide, you know, can we do both? And what was great about being at Missouri State is learning that not all universities are like Penn State. Penn State's great, don't get me wrong, but there are so many different types of universities that emphasize different things. There are teaching universities, there are universities that are more public affairs oriented, and that's exactly what Missouri State is. It's a public affairs focused university. And so in order to get tenure, yes, you have to publish, yes, you have to be a strong teacher because teaching really does matter, but you also have to be publicly engaged in some way. And they measure that in different ways, right? Are you part of nonprofit boards in the city of Springfield? Are you working with the city government or city council or state government on certain policies? So that for me was like the sweet spot of not having to choose either. I can do both, right? And so for me, I think one of the biggest points of awakening when I learned that there's so many different types of universities, and you can thread that needle of doing both. Now I will say, and this is something else I'll just note, universities are changing. We are dealing with a lot of enrollment issues. For those of you not familiar with the politics of Missouri, it's a very far-right conservative state, and they are starting to attack DEI programs. They're starting to attack what we can teach in the classroom. So we have students who are recording professors and publishing them as like, indoctrinators. So it is getting really challenging. So I think that's something else to really be mindful of when you're making these decisions. Penn State is in a secure place. It's in a state that tends to be a little bit more moderate and center. But depending on where you are, Florida, Missouri, Texas, that can really make a huge impact on how your academic experience is. So just wanted to note that.
Hi again, Tanya. So I had a little bit of a different career path in that I ended up in industry. And I think the main message I want to start out with is that there are lots of cool opportunities all along, and I think you've already heard that from the other panelists here. There's always surprises and lots of opportunities, and you just have to keep your ears and eyes open, and then sometimes just jump in and see what comes out of it. And I was trying to remember what was I thinking when I was when I was in graduate school here, and thinking, oh my God, this is so stressful. What am I going to do next? My next decision is going to influence my entire life, and I better make the best decision, because if I don't, then I might set myself up for some sort of failure for the rest of my life. And I'm hoping that the one thing I try to convey is, I think in your professional life, there's so many things you can change along the way. So I wouldn't stress over it that much. As my husband often says, actually the far more important decision you make in your life is who you choose as your life partner. If you decide to choose to have a life partner. So that's far more influential in your life than your career path. So I just want to, put that out there as well. So I'll go back a little bit in my career path. So I'm originally from Austria. So I was an international student when I came to Penn State. So I came straight from Austria to Penn State. And it was an awesome experience for me because in Europe, as some of you might know, we don't have that typical college experience. And so when I came here for graduate school, it was kind of like college and grad school at the same time for me. And it was just a blast. I was like, oh my God, this is so great. And I had no idea about American football when I first came here. So I got a very good education here. And then the one thing that to me is always amazing is how many sports analogies are used in American speech. So I had to learn all that. I had no idea what that means. Let's throw a Hail Mary, or that came out of left field, or yeah. And I was like, what? What does that mean? So I had to learn all that kind of stuff. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So I came to Penn State and got my graduate degree in biochemistry and molecular biology. And then I did a postdoc at University of California, San Francisco, where I met Sarah. We were in the same lab. And the way the atmosphere and the general thoughts of especially the faculty there were is that you should always, you should only consider academia. That's your career path. And that's pretty much how I was thinking as well. I never thought I was going to end up in industry. And so I went on the job market for academic jobs. And my husband, he's a scientist too, so we both went on the job market. And amazingly, we even got offers at 2 universities, Big Ten schools, for faculty jobs. And it just didn't quite feel right. And I had one interview at an industrial place, DuPont. And I decided, let me just go to that interview and see what it's like. And it was a complete eye-opener. As I mentioned, I'd never thought I would end up in industry. And going there, back then it still had a central research and development program. And I was so impressed by the people that were there that they still did this, really cool science. And I didn't have to deal with grant writing and some of the other things, and have a sort of an impact on the world in a different manner, not so much, in the academics with just gaining a lot of knowledge, but actually applying things. And so we decided, wow, let's have me take this job. And my husband, he didn't even have a job when we moved to Wilmington, Delaware. And then I ended up being at DuPont for about 15 years before the job that I then took at a much smaller company called Origin Materials, where I then led the R&D program, the R&D team. And so that's kind of how I moved around. And yeah, as I said, I think the big thing is just to make sure that you always do what you feel like is the best thing for you at the time. And things might change, like what we've heard as well. You might like something else later on. And really the decisions you're making now is not going to determine the fate of the rest of your life, in the sense that you can't make any changes and you're doomed or whatever. So don't get too stressed. That's what I'm trying to say. There's lots of opportunities to move around.
In R&D?
Sorry?
R&D, you use the acronym?
I'm sorry.
Non-technical.
Research and development.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Us scientists are kind of bad about using acronyms and assuming, everybody knows, so apologies.
You can work for the federal government.
Yeah.
Speak in acronyms. I tried really hard not to speak in acronyms.
You did well. You did well. Are there any questions from members of the audience?
Dr. Preston?
Yes.
We actually have a couple of questions that came in a little while ago.
Let's go.
From online. So the first question was, do you have any advice for someone who planned on an academic career for the majority of their education, but now feels that it isn't the correct path anymore, especially when the majority of the experiences explored, like fellowships, assistantships, have been focused on those academic preparations? That's the first question. I can move on to the next question after we answer that one.
Do you have?
I have 2 questions.
Oh, come on. Let's feel
I guess I'm the poster child for that one because that's kind of the situation I was in. I say just if you, in my case, I actually knew somebody at DuPont that could give me a little bit of insight as well. So if there's any connections you have in industry, to seek those out, and maybe even going to certain conferences where there are also more industrial participants and seek them out and talk to them. That's one way. Or just if there's something that looks like you could apply for, just do it and see what happens. So.
This is why I also like the idea of always having safety nets. The person who talked me into learning how to scuba dive was also a friend of mine from my doctoral program, and he kept calling me risk adverse. And I think that's how I made these scary jumps, and I really was only geared towards an academic job. I cannot explain how much going to get your doctoral degree in DC that I was kept being told, oh, you don't have to do the federal stuff because you're going to be an academic. Even the person who convinced me to come to the State Department even told me that I should be an academic. But if you're not sure, then what you can do is do like Tanya said and test the waters, do some interviews, but always make sure you keep in contact with your academic network. I have friends, incredibly strong friends from grad school, from my master's program, from academics who I've met along the way. I'm still active in the academic societies, and that's how I kind of keep that safety net open, is I do interact with them. Sometimes I interact with them on, in my federal job, but then also as the academic side. And if you can teach a class as an adjunct, one of the things, as you heard in my speech, I kept saying about my dissertation advisor, she is still in my life. She is what we would call more of a sponsor. I used to call her a mentor, but now I know what a sponsor is, and she's clearly a sponsor. And if you can keep those connections, then there's always that foot in the door. And that's how I would approach kind of making that shift, even if you were 100% geared towards academia.
Actually, if I can just say one quick more thing, it also doesn't mean that the door is going to be closed forever. For academia, I've known quite a few colleagues at my first industrial job at DuPont who worked at DuPont for 5 to 10 years and then got an academic job again. So it's certainly does not close the door.
We've got a question here to follow.
So what if you're in the other position where you've been planning non-academia, but you start to wonder if you have academic interests? And so what's the reverse of that if you want to sort of amp up your teaching, if you haven't focused on that, and that's sort of the flip side of this other person?
I think that's sort of what I've been doing, in that, like I said, I never thought I would be in academia. My Master of Architecture degree was more of a design-based degree as opposed to a Master of Science in Architecture, which is more sort of research-based. But I really loved the teaching, and the way that I sort of obliquely entered it was by, like I said, volunteering and making connections and associates within the academic community, all through Philadelphia and elsewhere, staying in touch, and those relationships are really important in that, like I said, I didn't interview for the job. I actually, for the teaching job, it was actually that they reached out to me at some point and said, that I was known enough there that they wanted me to come do that. So I think an adjunct position, doing something that maybe is even like part-time is a good way to like sort of test that and see if that is what you really want to do.
Thank you.
I would just add, I think this is also just reiterating that understanding there are various different types of universities, right? And so, you know, community colleges, a lot of folks are opting to teach in community colleges given how, you know, for many folks, they're entering those colleges because it's just cost prohibitive to go to four-year university. So you're getting, you know, I think there tends to be this misconception about what community colleges are like and what kind of students they draw. But I have some colleagues and some friends who are community colleges and they just love it. So I think it's just being very clear about, you know, now if you're not publishing, if you knew that you want to do non-academic work and it didn't really you know, require or made you focus a lot on academic publishing, the reality is that you probably won't get some of those top Research One university jobs. But there are so many other different types of universities out there as well. So I think just keeping that, you know, being aware of those different options. And I also want to acknowledge something the other panelists had said, you know, social capital is your best friend. Right? It's so important. So keeping those networks alive and fostering those relationships is really important, because if you want to keep those doors open, you need to maintain those ties with people in your network.
When I was a master's student here, I entered into the Penn State Teaching Certificate. It was like a graduate school teaching certificate program, and I cannot tell you how many people have been impressed by that, but it also teaches you how to write a syllabus, different ways to deliver material, and that can help a little bit also to, you know, teaching is the best way in grad school to say that you can teach, but learning how to teach well can also help you. And one last piece of advice is we're all moving to some of our classes online, and teaching online is a very different skill than teaching, and a bunch of us who were primarily in the classroom, and then all of a sudden COVID happened, we had to do crash courses. I was incredibly fortunate that GW was like, wait, everybody's taking a crash course on how to do this. But that would also be, I would recommend that, because that would also make you a lot more competitive if you can somehow illustrate that you can teach online.
Before we go to the one. One second.
I was just going to add one more thing that isn't in relation to your question at all, but in this idea of sort of social capital and this idea of moving back and forth. I was actually offered 2 jobs recently, and the job that I'm working right now were all through connections from Temple University and not at all from the industry. So I'm meeting like-minded people who are interested in the same things. We know each other. We know we like working together. So the two are intertwined in many, many ways.
We'll take the question from the audience member.
Hi, I have a question on really similar lines to kind of what we're discussing right now. And so it's kind of the idea that, I don't know if this is just a scare factor, but I've been told that there's this imaginary timeline that if you go into industry after your PhD, I'm in engineering, so I don't know if it's field dependent, but if you go into industry after your PhD, there's this imaginary timeline, and when it expires, then you will no longer ever be able to get a tenure track position. And I was wondering if you could speak to the idea of, like, I know if you're not in a job where you're publishing, it's going to be harder, but the idea, I feel like you hear more people leaving academia to go into industry and not the other way around as much. So if you could just speak to that, I would really appreciate it.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I guess I'll give you an example. Who are the folks who are mentoring and training you at Penn State? They're elite academics who are trained at elite universities who have the elite in mind. So oftentimes all of this advice, I think, is coming from folks who just know a very specific. So I would say no. There is no, at least for certain types of universities, they would love to have folks who have a lot of applied research experience at places that are more technical, like when you're teaching students how to do, so I think it just depends on the university. It might be the case that for some, top research-focused universities, that might be the case. But for me, I think the other biggest, what made me want to be a professor, frankly, was changing the world. I'm so naive enough to think that if you change minds, you can change systems, and I'm learning that sometimes that I'm still optimistic, but it's certainly difficult. And I also knew that I wanted to be in the classroom, be around folks. Of course, my curiosity made me want to do research, but that was never really the primary focus for me. And so I think as soon as I understood there were universities that were very different than Penn State, where research it wasn't the publish or perish kind of model, that's when I'm like, okay, I think I can do academia. I think I want to do academia. And so that's what I would say. I think these timelines and all these other advice that you're getting, just be very careful to consider who's it coming from. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. They just have a very particular experience. When I was giving my job talk, preparing my job talk for Missouri State, most of the audience like, this is not a decent job talk. And I'm like, well, it's what they're asking for. This is maybe it's not a good job talk for Penn State or for Wisconsin or these other programs, but it's exactly what they're asking for. So I just learned to just take the advice with a grain of salt. They're not trying to steer me wrong in any way. They just don't know what they don't know.
Most likely, I will go back into academia. And people who really know me on both sides, some people actually take bets on when that's going to happen. But I had that fear when I was deciding to go, which is one of the reasons why I took time to really think about, did I want to fully commit to, it's one thing to have a fellowship, it's another thing to fully commit and get that full-time job. But I no longer have that fear. Will I get another tenure track job at an R1 institution? I didn't have a tenure track R1 job before, and I was okay with that. So most likely I would go into some of the smaller schools, and the older I get, the more that the smaller liberal arts colleges look better and better. But most likely I'll go back, and I'm no longer afraid of that timeline.
To this one also, it can be very field specific. So, be aware of that. But also, like for engineering, I know we have engineering faculty who have been in the workforce and then come in. There are a lot of engineering faculty, but you can look through people's bios, identify people who've done that, make an appointment with them, talk to them about how they did it, what they did. Some come in at a senior, they've had a full career in industry and come back as like a professor of practice. There's some special title where they, like the university's, excited to have someone who's been like at the top of their career in industry come back. But there are people who do it, and even if it's not the norm, it can happen. It could be hard. And some of it can depend on if you go to a company where research is part of your role as opposed to more applied things.
We have quite a few questions that have come in online, if we could ask a couple of those. So the first one here is, I'm a postdoc. During my undergrad, I did not get a chance to pursue education in the field I'm passionate about. Now I'm stuck in a field that I don't really enjoy. I'm now thinking of pursuing an MS or PhD degree in the field I am passionate about after my postdoc, but not many people are supportive of my decision, so I'm afraid to talk about it with my advisor. What would you advise?
I might irritate some folks when I say this, and I think this is coming from someone who now has tenure. Who cares? I mean, who cares, frankly, what you're, I mean, it's your life, and I think this is something that I have to remind myself of constantly, because I didn't want to disappoint my advisors. I didn't want to disappoint my loved ones. But it's my life, and I think we have this narrative, like this, the social clock. You have to do these things in this particular order, and then there's no backtracking. That's not true. I mean, I think it's never too late to pursue your. I know it sounds really hokey. It's never too late to pursue your dreams. If you do, life is too short to feel like you're in a position or in a place where you're not happy, and if that means just completely shifting focus and doing something else. I am, quite frankly, a lot of admiration for someone who wants to go through a PhD process again, but do you? Do you? That's what I would say, and I know I started off a little bit glib. I know how difficult it can be to have these conversations with your advisor and mentor, and I know that there can be ramifications. For example, frankly, if you tick off a mentor or an advisor, but at the end of the day, I think you have to be very true to yourself when you're trying to please yourself, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. I'm looking at you like you're asking the questions, even though it's the person. I guess it's the camera. Yes, follow your dreams. Right.
We'll take one more. Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say I totally agree. And in the end, if you think about it, a few years, well, even though a PhD is a little bit more than a few years, but I mean, I don't think I started my first real job until I was in my mid-30s, mid to late 30s. And for a lot of people, that seems pretty old. This is after PhD, after postdoc. So you can still do a lot after that. And I think these days, there's really no age limit to how long you can really keep going. So we at my current company, we hired people in their 70s. So I think you shouldn't be discouraged by just timeline issues like that.
Biden's running for re-election.
Yeah, exactly.
Two women that I went through my doctoral program with, they did go back and get masters. One was in a very specific type of applied research that just social science research kind of degree didn't cover, so she went back and got a master's in that. And the other one, she got a supply chain master's. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the idea is that odd. I already have 2 masters, so I didn't follow that.
You ready for the next one?
Yeah, there's another one here, and I think it's very interesting because I was thinking the same thing as you were all talking. And so the question is, I'm curious about how the members of the panel who exist in the 2 environments, doing some work for like teaching and also as an architect, how you exist in these 2 environments and make it work as in terms of work-life balance. How are you doing those 2 things?
Coffee.
I could start with that. For me, like I said, I went and I talked to the principals at the firm, and I was working in a very competitive, high output environment at the firm. And we negotiated an agreement where during the semester, I would be paid for a prorated 32-hour a week salary, assuming I'm leaving the office 3 afternoons a week. And that's enough that I could still get full benefits. 32 hours is the minimum that you could still get the vacation days and the sick days and all of that stuff. So it was actually like a really explicit agreement of how we would make that work. And then in doing so, my project teams, I could sort of set the expectations that, for those 3 afternoons a week, I wasn't going to be available. I'm not going to say it's easy. It is a lot of time management and juggling, and I would find myself teaching until 5:30 and coming back to the office some days to check in with the project team and make sure that I wasn't sort of leaving anybody hanging. But it was really just a transparency and a explicit conversation about what that would mean. When I started at the new firm that is with somebody who I've been teaching with for 12 years, founded her own firm 5 years ago. And when I started at that firm, that was the opening conversation before we even talked about moving over. She said, do you want to keep teaching? Is that an important part of your career? And how do we make that happen? What do you want out of architecture? So I think it's about openly having those conversations and finding out what is acceptable or not to the people who are sort of the leadership or the partners, stakeholders.
When you're with the federal government, you switch jobs every couple of years, and I'm always very upfront that this is a really important part. GW hires a lot of adjunct faculty because PhDs are a dime a dozen in DC. So they're also very open to the fact having full-time federal employees or people who work in think tanks, people who work on K Street. So they're very open to it. So with my students, I am very upfront with them. This week has been a very busy week, and I try to get all of my grading done within a week. And I was just, I said, this has been a very busy week. Everybody kind of tracks what happens in Washington, so they weren't surprised. And I said, I'm sorry, but I will not get to your the rest of the papers until the following weekend. And I'm just very open with them and honest with them, and I set those expectations. And I hire a dog walker. A retiree comes in, and she also sits with my dog, and so my dog is well taken care of. But also, I don't teach year-round. I teach second session summer and fall, and then I spend the first session summer and spring recuperating.
Work-life balance. Do you have another one?
So this is an interesting one because the person has framed this conversation in a little bit of a different way. Is it recommended to change career paths when you realize you don't really enjoy what you are working on anymore? Are potential recruiters sympathetic towards job hopping? They're kind of framing it as job hopping.
I'm going to ask you to repeat the question because they are stunned.
So are potential recruiters sympathetic towards job hopping if you're going from academia to industry, or I guess back and forth?
So this is Kyler's perspective, and I don't know all the jobs out there, so just keep that in mind. I will say the pandemic changed a lot. And I think the way, I understand the argument. I think that it matters a lot less the actual job hopping itself and the reasons behind the job hopping, right? And so I think I have a friend. I talk to a lot of my folks who because I'm trying to low-key get out of academia, especially in Missouri. I feel like it's just not safe to be an academic in Missouri anymore. So I've been having a lot of conversations with friends about non-academic jobs, nonprofit jobs. That's something else for anyone who's interested in another sector. Nonprofits, really great option for academics. They have a lot of data and not a lot of folks who know how to use those data. So he's had several jobs, I think maybe 4 or 5 in the last 3 years, and he has no issue. And I think it just depends on how you present it and how you frame it. One of the particular jobs was a startup, and so they went belly up, and so obviously he had to jump to another job. And the other 2 were just things that he didn't feel challenged intellectually, and he communicated those things. He was very open and honest, and they were just so happy to have someone with his skill set that nothing really mattered. So I think you're right. It can be a red flag. I think just being prepared to talk about why you made those shifts. But again, I think it just depends. It depends on the sector, depends on the job, but again, generally, if you're open and honest and communicative, I don't think it's going to necessarily hamstring you too much.
I'll just reinforce what Kyler said, because I think I'm in a role that nobody decided this is what we're going to go into. Like, nobody decides, I'm going to go into compliance. There's a few folks who maybe do, but for the most part, and I mean, I often, when I'm talking with folks, like, I have to talk about it like I went to the dark side, right? Because, and it's administration, and it's a different area of the university that folks aren't familiar with. It's staff position, which if you're not aware at a university, there's a lot of, I think probably as grad students, you feel that ranking, right? You feel that ranking for like, oh gosh, there's the professor, and is it a tenured professor? Is it a teaching professor? There's lots of different ranks there. Staff is a different kind of ranking too. And if I talk to folks who I worked with when I was a faculty member, there's a feeling like, I think this maybe even goes a little bit to the, like, what do you want to do? Like, are you happy where you are? Because there are folks who look at it like, oh, we're sorry. And I was like, I'm not grading. Any questions? So, not taking it as that, but I'm thinking that for where I am, we have folks who are coming from all different kinds of areas because nobody went and said, I'm going to work for the IRB when I grow up. And so it's thinking about, and I'm, if you did, maybe, but so, because nobody knows what the IRB is, right? And that's who's protecting your human subjects research that you're doing. So we're not over acronyming. But thinking about it, so we have folks who came from industry. We do have folks who came from academia, who came from different types of positions there. And I think it is about that narrative. Like, what can you say? What did I learn in these other positions? And why was it not a good fit? And why would this one be a good fit then? I think that's what I want to know. Like, are you making that leap thoughtfully? And I think a lot of us here are talking about, we had to make some pretty scary leaps. But if you can tell us why you're making that and how it's going to contribute to what you want to do now, and why do you think you're making the next leap? Because I think that's the only thing is, if you've jumped 4 times, we don't want to be the 5th on the way to the 6th necessarily from that potential perspective there. So, but I think a lot of it is too is I didn't like this, and but I learned this, or I learned this about myself, and this is what I did like, and I'd like to shift over to this job that does more of that and more of what I liked. So, different ways to frame that potentially.
Yeah, and I'd like to just also reiterate some of the same sort of topics, especially in the biotechnology industry and in pharma. People change jobs a lot, and often that's a way to sort of get to the next level, basically get a promotion. People move from one company to another, so it's definitely not seen as a negative, at least in that area. And like I think you mentioned, or that a lot of startups have issues with financing, so you don't really have a choice. So I think as long as you're honest about it and you, like you said, say why you changed, I don't think it's definitely not always a negative. Often it's even a positive because you bring a lot of different experiences.
I think I would also add, I think there is a difference. When I hear of job hopping, I think there's a difference between staying in an organization for a few months and then another organization for a few months and another organization for a few months and a career shift. I don't think of a career shift as job hopping. I think that's a different thing. That means a different thing for an employer.
We need to take one from the floor.
Thanks. Speaking as somebody who's doing a transition after 10 years in industry to graduate school, I'm wondering if you might be able to talk through, in moments of your own transitions, what surprised you as the hiring process kind of manifested between sectors? So how does it vary by sector, if anything surprised you in that sense?
Real quickly, when I say that an academic interview is usually 2 to 3 days long, there is a shock of horror on people's faces. And usually the job interview is 30 minutes. So you have 30 minutes as opposed to you have 4 different discussions with faculty members. You have your speech, you've sent, or your lectures, and that's what I have found is they make decisions a lot quicker, and it's really 30 minutes, and that's all you have to sell yourself.
My experience is maybe a little bit different. So I'm in the in the biotechnology sort of chemical area, and the one thing that actually surprised me is how similar the academic and the industry interviews were in my case. So for both places that I went to in industry, I went there in person and had a whole day interview. So giving a presentation myself and then talking to a bunch of different people, which was very similar to the academic interviews I had. And so in that particular case, it was actually quite similar. So.
We have another question from the audience.
Yeah, so in graduate school, we learn a lot of skills related to our research area and doing whatever it is we're here to do on the title. But we also pick up a lot of skills that are not necessarily explicitly about our research, about management, about working with people, about working in policy or in student government or whatever else. what skills from graduate school did you pick up that you found were the most useful, as you made your way through your career, and what skills do you think would have been helpful to pick up while you were there that would have made that transition, made finding jobs and doing things with it better?
I guess I can start. So I think that the soft skills are definitely incredibly important that we often don't get taught in graduate school. I think, especially speaking from somebody in industry, teamwork is absolutely critical because you have to be able to work with people from different disciplines and within your team. So whatever opportunities you can get to pick up those kind of skills, I would definitely recommend doing that. Even if it's just doing projects with other students, help mentoring undergrads. All that already really helps. Find a postdoc or somebody that you could potentially do a project with. Just honing your skills and teamwork are really important.
We'll take one more answer from Kyler.
Yeah, sorry. What I would say is teaching, honestly, because being able to communicate really complex, abstract ideas is so very important. And so I know that oftentimes students prioritize getting RA-ships and doing research, which is really important. But if you do want to go into teaching or a more teaching-focused university, or just have some of that skill that I think can certainly translate to a whole bunch of different careers, I think getting some experience teaching, and not only TAing, teaching your own class would be ideal. And related, I think the other piece that I think, like just public speaking and performance, I think are also really important. I've been told many times that you're too extroverted to be an academic, or and so I think that's an unfortunate stereotype. I've met a number of academics who are very charismatic and extroverted, but that's something else. Just not being seen as like this kind of egghead, but someone who can actually talk to people and be human. Not to say that but I guess that would be my answer. Teaching, and then also finding ways to really practice, public speaking, and also just performance in general.
We'll take another question. I think there was one right down here in front. I think I have 4 in the audience. How many do you have? 2, okay. We can start there or here.
Thank you very much. This question, I would like to address this question to Dr. Tanya Gruber. So as you mentioned that you were an international student, so I'm just curious, could you please share with us your experience as an international student who graduated, who just finished your program and then started to look for jobs in the industry, maybe like the challenges that you were facing at the time and how you overcome the situation. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, one of the big issues is always the visa issues, right? That you have to overcome. So that's a big one, just knowing your options and finding places where you can get potential sponsorship for visa, because obviously if you don't have the right to work, you can't really do it. Otherwise, making sure I think that goes to a little bit what you say as well, is really learning how to communicate well in English. That certainly helps a lot. I'm sure most international students that come to Penn State are already very good in English, but it always helps to keep working on your presentation skills and language skills, and and then just getting familiar sort of with the American culture as well. It takes a while to get used to, some of the aspects, but then also never forgetting your own identity and background, because that always brings a lot of value as well. So.
As a follow-up, it takes a while for everybody to get used to American culture. We have one in the front right here.
So we've been talking about at the turning point for job hopping or career switch. So we will be honest to the company. But I think we definitely need to be honest to ourselves, right? So at that moment of your turning point, how do you decide what do you really want?
I can just quickly say what, in my case, since I had job offers from both, I really went with my gut feeling. That was what I went with in the end. I mean, I tried to do the spreadsheets, pros and cons and all that, but in the end, it was just a gut feeling, trying to imagine myself in either position, and then which one was the one that I thought I would just belong more in. So.
And I would think the gut, absolutely. Like, what does this feel right? And even when you're interviewing with those folks too, right? Like, what am I learning here? What am I hoping to gain from being with these people? What do I need right now? What would I like? And I think I also sort of try and imagine what both routes might look like a little bit, and what would I regret, right? Because I think that was thinking, for me at least, even in terms of where I was going, like, well, what will I regret if if I'm going to say, oh, I always wish I'd tried X, Y, or Z, and you don't know that for sure, but I think there's a way to think about that a little bit and go, I'm going to be really sad if I didn't give that one a go, at least. And so that was even for me thinking about, for example, saying, yeah, I'm going to spend 3 years studying poetry, even if that might not be a career, is thinking about, but I'm always going to regret it if I didn't give that a try, if I didn't allow myself to try that path as well, and then, end up keeping both of them in a way. So I think that gut and allowing room for yourself to sort of be open to what the world is, has ideas for. So
I loved my life in DC, and I deeply missed it. And I chose a path that works for me, that I can keep my friends, that I could keep, I really do love DC culture and almost everything about DC. So for me, that decision was, what will allow me to live where the place that makes me the happiest?
Leslie, let's go to...
So one of the questions I think was very similar to Trio's question. So,
okay.
I think that one was answered. This one might be a little bit challenging.
And then we'll take our participant in the pink shirt.
So, Tanya, I'm not sure if you can help with this question.
Was it you or?
But we'll give it a go. So, for an international student, and I think basically what they're saying is they like to find a teaching department in academia, but in a fine arts department. But they usually those departments want experience outside of academia, but it's very hard as an international student to find those experiences outside of academia. So basically, I think what they're asking is, how does one who's an international applicant find experiences outside of the academia? And I know you're not coming from the arts, but do you have any advice for, in other words, students looking for experiences in, we'll say, industry, who are looking for experience?
Yeah, I mean, with the visa issues, that's always the big issue, right? I wonder if that person could potentially even get experiences outside of the United States and then reapply back, because that's certainly, that's certainly not a disadvantage, right? It's not going to hurt your chances otherwise. And then try to keep connections with American colleagues, or keep going to conferences. That's always a big one. Come to the U.S. to American conferences and just forge those relationships. But yeah, I can completely empathize with the whole. I went through all sorts of visa issues myself. But yeah, unfortunately, there are no simple answers. But just don't give up, and just keep collecting those experiences and try to make it to the U.S. on some sort of sponsorship.
Would you say networking plays a really big role?
Networking makes a really big difference. Yeah.
And we have room for one more question.
Hi, everyone. My question may be more suited to Dr. Sherman Wilkins, but please, for anyone who can answer. there may be more common knowledge surrounding how to best prepare yourself during your doctoral degree on how to attain a job at a Research One facility or a university that's more suited to research. But I wanted to know about how to best prepare yourself for a job at a more public affairs focused university or for the nonprofit sector.
That's a good question. And one, I know this is not like an academic job prep session, but one thing that I will say is, so having been on the hiring committee and receiving applications from folks at Missouri who are applying to Missouri State, you would get people who would just apply, and you could tell that it was like just like their safety school, so to speak, right? So they would prepare their CVs as if they're applying to R1s, and they weren't really tailoring it to what the actual needs are for the particular university. I think what I would say is just do your research on what types of applicants they're looking for, what makes professors successful there. Missouri State's public, and they're very transparent, so you can actually look to see what their tenure and promotion guidelines are. You just click on the website, they show you what they are. Talk to faculty, right? If you're dissertating and you need to avoid writing your dissertation, right? Some productive procrastination. Go ahead and email folks at the university and say, hey, your program looks really cool, of course, you probably won't necessarily know if they're hiring necessarily, but just get a sense of what types of things that they are looking for. I've had a couple of conversations with folks which were really great about like, hey, I'm thinking about applying to, they weren't in my department, they were in another department. They just wanted to connect, frankly, because there's not too many people of color at Missouri State. And so they just wanted to connect and say, hey, I'm thinking of applying to, like, what has your experience been? And it's been really helpful because it allowed them to really get a sense of like what makes someone successful at that particular job. And that goes for not just the public affairs, but also teaching universities, liberal arts colleges, which are magical, by the way. They're super magical. But you have to be very specific and tailored. No one wants to get an application where they think that their university is being treated as an afterthought. And I've seen people who are getting PhDs from Harvard and some of these top programs in their disciplines who are passed over because there's like, what are they going to do for this university? And the answer is nothing. They haven't communicated that. So I would just say doing your homework, talking to people. Social capital goes beyond people that you already know. It also are people that you want to get to know to help you. And so contacting those folks who are currently there could be a really good place to start.
Well, I'm here for the summary, okay? So our takeaways for today. Let's see where we're going to start. Number one, what we've learned from our panelists is that you can be the first, meaning you can carve out your own path. There's some change in times. Know your value, and with the change in times, there's always things that are undone that requires work to be done and more people to do that work. That person can be you. Be what you want to be, not what others expect you to be. Take time for you. Take time and find the small things in life that make you happy. Get a dog walker. That's what I got. There are always surprises, and learn to surprise yourself. There is a such thing as productive procrastination. I really do like that. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to tell my friends I did it, but I'll give you credit. So dare to be different and dare to be different, but yet surprise yourself. Relationship building is key. And leverage your social capital, know your social capital. At some point or another, you start off with a little bit of social capital, and as it grows, your network grows. So dare to be sponsors as well. Understand work-life balance. Outline and negotiate the things that you want. You don't have to just settle. Be transparent in what you want, because taking a job that you don't want is misery. And last but not least, don't give up. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.